The military transport plane sat on the runway, engines humming with power, ready to carry 47 souls across dangerous territory. Inside the cockpit, two worlds were about to collide in ways that would redefine what leadership truly means. Captain Sarah Mitchell had logged over 3,000 flight hours, survived 3 combat deployments, and earned the respect of every pilot who'd ever flown beside her. But today, she faced something more dangerous than enemy fire or mechanical failure. Today, she faced a superior who believed her gender made her unfit to command the most critical mission of her career. What happened next would echo through military corridors for years to come, proving that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in the sky, but right there on the ground, where courage meets conviction and one person's refusal to back down changes everything. This is the story of how a Navy SEAL pilot turned the tables on discrimination, showed what real leadership looks like, and proved that respect isn't given based on rank alone. It's earned through actions that speak louder than any authority could ever shout. The morning sun cast long shadows across Naval Air Station Oceana as Captain Sarah Mitchell walked toward the briefing room, her flight suit crisp and her mind sharp. She had been up since 0430 hours, reviewing weather patterns, flight paths, and mission parameters for what would be one of the most challenging assignments of her 12-year military career. The mission briefing was scheduled for 0800, and, as always, Sarah arrived 15 minutes early. She pushed open the heavy metal door to find the briefing room already buzzing with activity. Maps covered the walls, satellite images spread across tables, and the distinctive smell of strong military coffee filled the air. Her fellow pilots looked up as she entered, nodding respectfully. Sarah had earned her place among these elite aviators through years of exceptional performance, countless hours of training, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that had never gone unnoticed. The mission they were about to discuss was no ordinary transport operation. Intelligence reports indicated that a team of military advisors and critical medical supplies needed immediate evacuation from a forward operating base in hostile territory. The weather forecast showed deteriorating conditions, with sandstorms expected to roll through the region within the next 18 hours. The window for a safe extraction was narrow, and the margin for error was non-existent. Commander James Rodriguez entered the room at exactly 0800, his expression serious as he approached the podium. Rodriguez was a veteran pilot himself, with over 20 years of service and a reputation for running tight operations. He scanned the room, his eyes briefly meeting Sarah's before moving on to address the assembled pilots. The briefing began with standard protocol reviews, weather updates, and intelligence assessments. Sarah took detailed notes, cross-referencing the information with her own pre-mission research. She had already identified 3 potential contingency routes and calculated fuel requirements for each scenario. Her preparation was thorough, as always, and she felt confident in her ability to execute whatever mission was assigned. When Rodriguez announced the pilot assignments, the room fell silent with anticipation. These missions were coveted opportunities that could define a pilot's career, and everyone understood the weight of responsibility that came with them. Sarah listened as her colleagues received their assignments, each one more routine than the last. Transport missions to established bases, supply runs to secure locations, training exercises with predictable parameters. Then, Rodriguez paused, looking directly at Sarah before speaking her name. "Captain Mitchell," he began, and she straightened in her chair, ready to receive what she assumed would be the challenging evacuation mission they had been discussing. Instead, Rodriguez continued with words that hit her like a physical blow. "You'll be flying supplies to the domestic training facility at Pensacola. Standard cargo run, nothing complicated." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah's fellow pilots exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from confusion to sympathy. Everyone knew that Sarah was the most qualified pilot for the evacuation mission. Her combat experience, her technical skills, and her flawless safety record made her the obvious choice for such a critical operation. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what had just happened. The Pensacola assignment was the kind of routine mission typically given to junior pilots or those returning from medical leave. It was not the assignment for someone with her qualifications and experience. She felt heat rising in her cheeks, but her voice remained steady as she responded with the only words appropriate in such a setting. "Yes, sir." After the briefing ended and the other pilots began filing out of the room, Sarah remained in her seat, staring at the mission parameters she had written in her notebook. The evacuation mission had been assigned to Captain Derek Walsh, a competent pilot, but one with significantly less combat experience than Sarah. Walsh was a good pilot, but everyone in that room knew that Sarah was better suited for the challenging conditions and high-stakes nature of the evacuation. As the room emptied, Commander Rodriguez gathered his materials and prepared to leave. Sarah made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events that none of them could have predicted. She stood and approached the podium, her heart pounding but her resolve unwavering. "Sir, may I speak with you privately?" she asked, her voice professional but firm. Rodriguez looked up from his papers, and for a moment, Sarah saw something in his eyes that confirmed what she had been thinking. This wasn't about qualifications or readiness. This was about something else entirely. "Captain Mitchell, your assignment stands as given," Rodriguez replied without looking up from his paperwork. "The Pensacola run is important logistics work, and I need someone reliable handling it." Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. In the military, questioning a superior's decision required delicate navigation, but she knew that her career and her principles were both on the line. "Sir, with respect, I believe there may have been a misunderstanding about pilot assignments. My experience with combat evacuations and adverse weather conditions makes me well suited for the more challenging mission parameters." Rodriguez finally looked up, his expression hardening slightly. "Captain, are you questioning my judgment in pilot assignments?" The room seemed to grow smaller as the tension between them became palpable. "Because if you are, I should remind you that I've been making these decisions since before you were even in flight school." The implication in his words was clear, even if he hadn't said it directly. Sarah felt the weight of every woman who had fought for recognition in military aviation, every pilot who had been overlooked because of assumptions about their capabilities rather than assessments of their skills. She thought about the young female pilots who would come after her, and whether they would face the same barriers she was encountering. "No, sir, I'm not questioning your judgment," Sarah replied carefully. "I'm simply ensuring that you have all the relevant information about pilot qualifications for this particular mission. My record shows successful completion of 17 combat evacuations under adverse conditions, including 3 missions in similar weather patterns to what we're expecting today." Rodriguez's jaw tightened, and Sarah could see that her persistence was not being well received. "Captain Mitchell, your record is noted and appreciated. However, I need pilots who can follow orders without extended discussion. The assignments have been made based on multiple factors that you may not be privy to." As Rodriguez gathered his materials and moved toward the door, Sarah realized that this conversation was about more than just one mission assignment. This was about establishing precedent, about determining whether qualified pilots would be evaluated solely on their merits or whether other factors would continue to influence critical decisions. She thought about the lives that hung in the balance of the evacuation mission, and about the message that would be sent if the most qualified pilot was sidelined without explanation. "Commander Rodriguez," she called out as he reached the door. He turned back, his expression showing clear irritation at the continued conversation. "I want to be completely clear about something. If you need a pilot who can execute this evacuation mission safely and successfully, regardless of the challenges we might face, I am prepared and ready to serve." Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him weighing his response. The conversation had moved beyond the realm of routine military discussion into territory that both of them understood was significant. His next words would either acknowledge her qualifications and experience, or they would reveal the real reason behind his decision. "Captain Mitchell," Rodriguez said slowly, his voice carrying a tone of finality. "Sometimes the most challenging missions require pilots who can keep their emotions in check and follow orders without complication. I need someone who won't get rattled when things get difficult, someone who can handle the pressure without becoming a liability to the mission or the crew." The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she realized that Rodriguez was essentially suggesting that her gender made her emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous under pressure. It was exactly the kind of outdated thinking that she had hoped the military had moved beyond, but here it was, disguised as concern for mission safety. "Sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "My record speaks to my ability to handle pressure and execute missions successfully. I have never been a liability to any operation, and I have consistently performed at the highest levels under the most challenging conditions." Rodriguez's expression softened slightly, but not in a way that suggested he was reconsidering his position. "Look, Mitchell, you're a good pilot. Nobody's questioning that. But some missions require a certain type of pilot, and I need to make decisions based on what I think is best for overall mission success. That's what leadership means. As Rodriguez finally left the briefing room, Sarah stood alone among the empty chairs and abandoned coffee cups, processing what had just occurred. She understood now that this was about more than just one mission or one commander's preferences. This was about systemic attitudes that could affect her entire career and the careers of every woman who would follow in her footsteps. Sarah looked at the mission board where the assignments were posted, seeing her name next to the routine Pensacola run while knowing that she should be preparing for the much more critical evacuation. She thought about Captain Walsh, who would be taking on a mission that could very well exceed his experience level, and about the people waiting for evacuation who deserved the most qualified pilot available. She made a decision that would require every ounce of courage she had developed through years of military service. Sarah was going to find a way to ensure that this mission was executed by the most qualified pilot, regardless of what Commander Rodriguez had decided. She wasn't sure exactly how she would make that happen, but she knew that she couldn't simply accept an assignment that put people at risk because of assumptions about her capabilities. As she walked out of the briefing room and toward the flight line, Sarah began formulating a plan that would test every relationship she had built in her military career and challenge the very foundations of how decisions were made in her unit. She had no idea that within hours, her decision would bring her face to face with someone whose support would change everything about how this situation would unfold. The morning sun was climbing higher as Sarah made her way across the tarmac, but she felt like she was walking into the storm of her lifetime. Everything she had worked for, everything she believed in, and everything she hoped to achieve was about to be put to the ultimate test. The only question now was whether her courage and determination would be enough to overcome the barriers that stood between her and the mission she knew she was meant to fly. Sarah spent the next hour in the aircraft maintenance hangar, checking and double-checking the systems on the plane assigned to her Pensacola mission. She found herself going through the motions mechanically, her mind still reeling from the conversation with Commander Rodriguez. The routine nature of the supply run felt like an insult to her years of training and experience, but, more importantly, she couldn't shake the feeling that the evacuation mission was being handled by someone less prepared for its challenges. As she completed her pre-flight inspection, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of combat boots approaching across the concrete floor. She looked up to see Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thompson walking toward her with purposeful strides. Thompson was a legend in naval aviation circles, a former Navy SEAL who had transitioned to pilot training after a distinguished career in special operations. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, and Sarah had heard countless stories about his courage, his tactical brilliance, and his unwavering commitment to mission success. Thompson was not someone who engaged in casual conversation or social visits. His presence in the maintenance hangar was immediately significant, and Sarah straightened as he approached her aircraft. She had worked with Thompson on several missions over the past 2 years, and while their interactions had always been professional and respectful, they had never developed the kind of personal relationship that would warrant an impromptu visit. "Captain Mitchell," Thompson said as he reached her position near the aircraft's wing. His voice carried the calm authority that came from years of leading men and women in life-or-death situations. "I heard about this morning's briefing. Mind if I ask you a few questions about your thoughts on the mission assignments?" Sarah felt a surge of surprise and curiosity. Thompson's question suggested that news of her assignment had already spread through the pilot community, which meant that others had noticed the unusual nature of Rodriguez's decision. She wondered how much Thompson knew about what had transpired in the briefing room and what his interest in the situation might mean. "Of course, sir," Sarah replied, setting down her inspection checklist. "Though I'm not sure how much insight I can provide beyond what was covered in the official briefing." Thompson nodded, but his expression indicated that he was looking for more than surface-level information. "I've been reviewing the mission parameters for today's evacuation, and I have some concerns about the pilot assignment. The weather conditions, the terrain challenges, and the time constraints all suggest that this operation requires someone with extensive combat evacuation experience." Sarah's heart began to race as she realized that Thompson was essentially echoing her own assessment of the situation. His words carried significant weight because of his reputation and experience, and if he shared her concerns about the mission assignment, it might mean that there was still a possibility for reconsideration. "I share those concerns, sir," Sarah replied carefully. "The mission parameters do present several challenges that require specific experience and training to handle safely." Thompson studied her for a moment, and Sarah could see him evaluating not just her words, but her overall demeanor and confidence level. Captain Mitchell, I've reviewed your service record in detail. Your performance on combat evacuations has been exemplary, and your safety record is spotless. In my professional opinion, you are the most qualified pilot available for today's evacuation mission. The directness of Thompson's statement caught Sarah off guard. In military culture, such explicit endorsements were rare, especially when they contradicted decisions already made by superior officers. Thompson's willingness to voice this opinion suggested that he had thought carefully about the implications and had decided that the importance of mission success outweighed the potential risks of challenging established assignments. Sir, I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, Sarah responded. However, the assignments have already been made, and I understand the importance of following the chain of command. Thompson's expression grew more serious, and he took a step closer, lowering his voice slightly. Captain, let me tell you something I've learned from 23 years of military service. Sometimes following orders blindly isn't the same as serving your country effectively. Sometimes real leadership means ensuring that the right people are in the right positions, regardless of who might feel uncomfortable with that reality. Sarah felt the weight of Thompson's words and the implication behind them. He was suggesting that Rodriguez's decision had been based on factors other than pilot qualifications, and he was indicating his willingness to challenge that decision. The fact that someone of Thompson's stature was taking this position gave Sarah hope, but it also made her aware of the significant risks involved for both of them. What are you suggesting, sir? Sarah asked, knowing that the answer could change the trajectory of her entire career. Thompson glanced around the hangar to ensure they weren't being overheard, then looked directly at Sarah. I'm suggesting that we have a conversation with the base commanding officer about ensuring that mission assignments are based solely on pilot qualifications and readiness. I'm also suggesting that sometimes the most important battles in military service happen on the ground, when we stand up for principles that matter more than personal comfort. Sarah realized that Thompson was offering to put his own reputation and career on the line to support her challenge to Rodriguez's decision. The gesture was both unexpected and deeply meaningful, representing the kind of leadership and moral courage that she had always aspired to demonstrate in her own career. Sir, I need you to understand that if we pursue this course of action, it could have significant consequences for both of us, Sarah said. Commander Rodriguez made his decision, and challenging it directly could be seen as insubordination. Thompson's expression hardened, and Sarah could see the SEAL training and mindset that had defined his military career. Captain Mitchell, let me ask you a question. If you were trapped in hostile territory, waiting for evacuation, would you want the most qualified pilot coming to get you? Or would you want the pilot who was chosen because he made someone feel more comfortable? The question struck Sarah like a physical blow because it cut to the heart of what was really at stake. This wasn't just about her career or her feelings of being treated unfairly. This was about the lives of people who were depending on military aviation to get them home safely, and about whether those people would be served by the best available pilot or by someone chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with competence. I would want the most qualified pilot, sir, Sarah replied without hesitation. Then, we understand each other, Thompson said. Because the people waiting for evacuation today deserve nothing less than the best pilot we can send them, regardless of who that makes uncomfortable or what assumptions it challenges. Thompson's words crystallized something that had been building in Sarah's mind since the morning briefing. This situation was bigger than her individual career aspirations or personal feelings about fair treatment. This was about military effectiveness, mission success, and the safety of personnel who were counting on their colleagues to make decisions based on competence rather than bias. What do you propose we do? Sarah asked, feeling her resolve strengthening as she contemplated the possibility of taking action. Thompson checked his watch and then looked back at Sarah. Base Commanding Officer Captain Harrison is known for making decisions based on mission effectiveness rather than politics. If we can present him with a clear assessment of pilot qualifications and mission requirements, I believe he'll make the right call. Sarah felt a surge of both excitement and apprehension as she considered what Thompson was suggesting. Captain Harrison had a reputation as a fair and thoughtful leader, but he was also someone who valued military hierarchy and proper procedure. Approaching him about Rodriguez's decision would require careful preparation and compelling arguments. Sir, before we proceed, I need to ask you something, Sarah said. Why are you willing to put yourself on the line for this? You don't owe me anything, and challenging Rodriguez could affect your own standing. Thompson was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him considering how much to reveal about his motivations. Captain Mitchell, throughout my career, I've seen too many good people hurt and too many missions compromised because decisions were made based on comfort rather than competence. I've also seen what happens when qualified people are sidelined because they don't fit someone's idea of what a leader should look like. He paused, and Sarah could see the weight of experience behind his words. More than that, though, I've learned that real leadership isn't about maintaining the status quo or avoiding difficult conversations. Real leadership is about ensuring that the best people are in position to succeed, regardless of whether that challenges anyone's preconceptions. Sarah felt a deep appreciation for Thompson's willingness to stand up for principles that mattered, even when it would have been much easier for him to simply ignore the situation. His support gave her the confidence to move forward with a challenge that she never could have undertaken alone. "How do we approach Captain Harrison?" Sarah asked. Thompson smiled for the first time since their conversation had begun. "We request a meeting to discuss pilot qualifications for critical missions. We present the facts about your experience and training, and we let him make an informed decision based on what's best for mission success." As they began walking toward the base administrative offices, Sarah felt like she was stepping into uncharted territory. She had never challenged a superior officer's decisions so directly, and she had never had someone of Thompson's stature willing to support her in such a challenge. The conversation with Captain Harrison would determine not only the outcome of today's mission assignments, but also the direction of her military career. Thompson paused before they entered the building and turned to Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, I want you to understand something. Regardless of how this meeting goes, you've already proven something important by being willing to stand up for what you believe is right. That kind of moral courage is exactly what the military needs, and it's exactly what makes someone worthy of the most challenging assignments." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for Thompson's words and for his willingness to support her in this critical moment. She also felt the weight of responsibility that came with having such strong backing from a respected leader. The meeting with Captain Harrison would require her to articulate her qualifications clearly and professionally, while making the case that mission effectiveness should always be the primary consideration in pilot assignments. As they walked through the corridors toward Captain Harrison's office, Sarah reflected on how much her morning had changed since the briefing. What had started as a routine mission assignment had evolved into a defining moment that would test everything she believed about leadership, fairness, and military service. The next hour would determine whether her principles and Thompson's support would be enough to ensure that the most critical mission of the day was handled by the most qualified pilot available. Captain Harrison's office occupied a corner of the base administrative building, with large windows that provided a clear view of the flight line and the aircraft that represented the heart of naval aviation operations. Sarah and Thompson waited in the outer office for nearly 20 minutes, watching as personnel moved through the corridors with the purposeful efficiency that characterized military installations. When Harrison's aide finally escorted them into the office, Sarah was struck by the wall of commendations, photographs, and unit insignia that told the story of a distinguished military career spanning more than 2 decades. Captain Harrison stood as they entered, his bearing reflecting the kind of leadership that came from years of making difficult decisions under pressure. "Lieutenant Commander Thompson, Captain Mitchell," Harrison said, gesturing toward 2 chairs positioned in front of his desk. "My aide mentioned that you requested this meeting to discuss pilot qualifications for today's missions. I have to admit, that's an unusual request, so I'm curious to hear what's on your minds." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized that the next few minutes would determine the outcome of everything she and Thompson had discussed. Harrison's tone was professional but cautious, suggesting that he was aware this meeting had the potential to address sensitive issues within his command structure. Thompson took the lead, his voice carrying the calm authority that had defined his military career. "Sir, we wanted to bring to your attention some concerns about pilot assignments for today's evacuation mission. After reviewing the mission parameters and pilot qualifications, we believe there may be an opportunity to optimize our approach for maximum mission effectiveness." Harrison's expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see him processing the implications of Thompson's carefully chosen words. The phrase, "optimize our approach," was diplomatic language for suggesting that current assignments were not ideal, and both men understood the delicate nature of what was being discussed. "Go ahead," Harrison said, settling back in his chair. "I'm listening." Thompson opened the folder he had brought and placed a single sheet of paper on Harrison's desk. "Sir, This is a comparison of pilot qualifications for combat evacuation missions. Captain Mitchell has completed 17 successful combat evacuations under adverse conditions, including 3 missions in weather patterns similar to what we're expecting today. Her safety record is flawless, and her technical scores on challenging weather operations are in the top 5% of all pilots in the squadron. Harrison picked up the document and studied it carefully, his expression growing more serious as he reviewed the information. Sarah could see him comparing the qualifications listed with what he knew about the day's mission assignments, and she watched as understanding began to dawn in his eyes. "And the pilot currently assigned to the evacuation mission?" Harrison asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to understand the nature of their concerns. "Captain Walsh is a competent pilot with solid basic qualifications," Thompson replied diplomatically. "However, his experience with combat evacuations is limited, and he has not previously operated in the challenging weather conditions we're expecting today." Harrison set the document down and looked directly at Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, what's your assessment of today's evacuation mission requirements?" Sarah felt the weight of the moment as she realized this was her opportunity to make the case for why she should be handling the most critical mission of the day. She had rehearsed her thoughts during the walk to Harrison's office, but now she needed to articulate them clearly and professionally. "Sir, the mission involves evacuating personnel from a forward operating base under deteriorating weather conditions with a narrow time window for safe extraction," Sarah began. "The approach to the landing zone requires navigation through mountainous terrain with limited visibility, and the departure will need to be executed quickly to avoid incoming weather systems." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Based on my experience with similar missions, I believe success will depend on a pilot's ability to adapt quickly to changing conditions, maintain precise control in challenging weather, and execute emergency procedures if complications arise. My training and experience have prepared me specifically for these types of scenarios." Harrison nodded, and Sarah could see him weighing her words against what he knew about the mission requirements. "Captain Mitchell, help me understand something. Are you suggesting that the current pilot assignment is inadequate for mission success?" The question put Sarah in a difficult position because criticizing Walsh directly would be unprofessional, but failing to address the qualification differences would undermine her entire argument. She chose her response carefully. "Sir, I'm suggesting that matching pilot qualifications to mission requirements is the best way to ensure successful outcomes. Captain Walsh is certainly capable of flying the mission, but my specific experience with combat evacuations and adverse weather operations may provide additional safety margins that could prove valuable if complications arise." Harrison turned to Thompson. "Lieutenant Commander, what's your professional assessment of this situation?" Thompson straightened in his chair, and Sarah could see him preparing to put his reputation fully behind their position. "Sir, in my opinion, Captain Mitchell is the most qualified pilot available for today's evacuation mission. Her combination of combat experience, technical skills, and safety record makes her the optimal choice for this type of operation." Harrison was quiet for several moments, and Sarah could see him considering not just the pilot qualifications, but also the broader implications of making changes to assignments that had already been announced. She understood that he was weighing mission effectiveness against potential disruption to his command structure. "Captain Mitchell," Harrison said finally, "I want to ask you directly about something. Are you suggesting that Commander Rodriguez's decision was based on factors other than pilot qualifications?" Sarah felt the tension in the room increase dramatically as Harrison addressed what everyone understood to be the underlying issue. Her response to this question would determine not only the outcome of today's mission assignments, but also potentially the future of her relationship with Rodriguez and her standing within the squadron. "Sir, I can only speak to my own qualifications and my assessment of the mission requirements," Sarah replied carefully. "I believe my experience makes me well suited for this particular operation, and I wanted to ensure that information was available for consideration." Harrison studied her for a moment, and Sarah could see him evaluating both her words and what she had chosen not to say. "Captain, I appreciate your diplomatic response, but I need to understand the full scope of what we're discussing here. Are there concerns about the decision-making process for pilot assignments?" Thompson leaned forward slightly, and Sarah realized he was preparing to address the more difficult aspects of their situation. "Sir, our primary concern is ensuring that critical missions are handled by the most qualified personnel available. If there are factors influencing assignments beyond pilot competence and mission requirements, that could potentially impact operational effectiveness. Harrison's expression hardened slightly as he grasped the full implication of Thompson's words. Lieutenant Commander, are you suggesting that there are inappropriate factors influencing pilot assignments in my command? The directness of Harrison's question forced Thompson to take a clear position on what had been a carefully diplomatic conversation. Sarah could see him weighing the risks of making explicit accusations against the importance of addressing what they both believed was happening. Sir, I'm suggesting that Captain Mitchell's qualifications for today's evacuation mission are superior to those of the currently assigned pilot, and that mission success should be our primary consideration in making assignments, Thompson replied. If other factors are influencing these decisions, then we have a responsibility to address that. Harrison stood and walked to his window, looking out at the flight line where aircraft were being prepared for the day's missions. Sarah could see him processing everything they had discussed, weighing the evidence they had presented against his knowledge of his own personnel and their capabilities. When he turned back to face them, his expression was serious but determined. Captain Mitchell, Lieutenant Commander Thompson, I want to be very clear about something. In this command, pilot assignments are made based on qualifications, mission requirements, and operational effectiveness. If those principles are not being followed consistently, then we have a problem that needs to be addressed immediately. Sarah felt a surge of hope as she realized that Harrison was taking their concerns seriously and appeared to be committed to making decisions based on merit rather than other considerations. Sir, Harrison continued, I'm going to review today's mission assignments personally, and I'm going to make changes if I determine that adjustments are necessary for optimal mission effectiveness. Captain Mitchell, I want you to be prepared to take on the evacuation mission if I determine that your qualifications make you the best choice for that operation. Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized that Harrison was essentially indicating his willingness to override Rodriguez's assignments if he concluded that changes were warranted. Yes, sir. I'm prepared and ready to handle whatever assignment serves the mission best. Harrison moved back to his desk and picked up his phone. I'm going to have a conversation with Commander Rodriguez about today's assignments, and then I'm going to make final decisions based on what I believe gives us the best chance for mission success. As Harrison began dialing, Thompson caught Sarah's eye and gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. She realized that they had successfully presented their case and that Harrison was prepared to take action based on their concerns. Commander Rodriguez, Harrison said into the phone, I need you in my office immediately to discuss today's mission assignments. We have some operational considerations that require immediate attention. When Harrison hung up the phone, he looked directly at Sarah. Captain Mitchell, I want you to understand that what happens next may create some tension within the squadron. Are you prepared for the possibility that challenging this decision could affect your relationships with some of your colleagues? Sarah thought about everything she had worked for in her military career and everything she believed about fair treatment and professional competence. Sir, I'm prepared to accept the consequences of standing up for what I believe is right. My primary concern is ensuring that missions are successful and that people get home safely. Harrison nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking I want to see from my pilots. Lieutenant Commander Thompson, thank you for bringing this situation to my attention. Your willingness to advocate for operational excellence is noted and appreciated. As they waited for Rodriguez to arrive, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her day had changed since the morning briefing. What had started as a frustrating assignment to a routine mission had evolved into a test of her principles and her willingness to fight for what she believed was right. The next few minutes would determine whether her courage and Thompson's support had been enough to ensure that the most critical mission of the day would be handled by the most qualified pilot available. Commander Rodriguez entered Captain Harrison's office with the brisk efficiency of a senior officer accustomed to being summoned for important discussions. His expression was confident, suggesting he expected a routine conversation about operational details rather than a fundamental challenge to his decision-making authority. The moment he saw Sarah and Thompson seated across from Harrison's desk, his entire demeanor shifted. Sir, I wasn't aware this would be a group meeting, Rodriguez said, his voice carefully controlled but clearly indicating surprise and growing concern about the situation he was walking into. Have a seat, Commander, Harrison replied, gesturing to an empty chair. We need to discuss today's pilot assignments for the evacuation mission, and I wanted to hear directly from you about the reasoning behind your decisions. Rodriguez settled into his chair, his eyes moving between Sarah and Thompson as he tried to assess what had already been discussed. Sarah could see him calculating the implications of their presence and formulating his response to whatever questions Harrison might ask. Sir, the assignments were made based on my assessment of pilot readiness and mission requirements, Rodriguez began. Captain Walsh is fully qualified for the evacuation mission, and I believe he'll execute it successfully. Harrison opened the folder Thompson had provided and placed the pilot qualification comparison on his desk where Rodriguez could see it. Commander, I've been reviewing the specific qualifications of our pilots for combat evacuation missions. Can you help me understand how you weighted the various factors in making your assignments? Rodriguez glanced at the document, and Sarah could see his jaw tighten as he recognized what was being discussed. The comparison made it clear that Sarah's qualifications significantly exceeded Walsh's for the type of mission they were planning, and Rodriguez understood that his decision was being questioned on professional grounds. Sir, pilot qualifications are certainly important, but they're not the only consideration, Rodriguez replied. I also evaluate factors like recent flight hours, current readiness status, and overall mission fit when making assignments. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression indicating that he was prepared to examine each of these factors in detail. Walk me through those considerations for today's assignments, Commander. I want to understand your complete decision-making process. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, realizing that Harrison was asking for specific justifications that would be difficult to provide without revealing the real reasons behind his choices. Captain Walsh has been performing well in recent training exercises, and I believe he's ready for more challenging assignments. Sometimes it's important to give pilots opportunities to grow and develop their skills. Thompson leaned forward slightly, and Sarah could see him preparing to address what he viewed as an inadequate justification for such a critical mission assignment. Commander Rodriguez, with respect, are you suggesting that today's evacuation mission is being used as a training opportunity rather than being assigned to the most qualified pilot available? The directness of Thompson's question created visible tension in the room. Rodriguez's face flushed slightly as he realized that his reasoning was being challenged by someone whose military credentials were impeccable and whose opinion carried significant weight. Lieutenant Commander Thompson, I resent the implication that I'm treating critical missions as training exercises, Rodriguez replied, his voice rising slightly. I've been making pilot assignments successfully for years, and I don't appreciate having my judgment questioned by people who weren't in the briefing room when these decisions were made. Harrison raised his hand to calm the situation before it escalated further. Gentlemen, let's keep this discussion focused on mission effectiveness. Commander Rodriguez, I need specific information about how you evaluated pilot qualifications for today's evacuation. Captain Mitchell has 17 successful combat evacuations and extensive experience with adverse weather operations. How did you weigh that experience against other factors? Rodriguez was silent for several moments, clearly struggling with how to respond to a direct question about Sarah's qualifications without revealing his actual reasoning. Sarah could see him searching for professional justifications for a decision that had been based on non-professional considerations. Captain Mitchell is certainly qualified, Rodriguez admitted reluctantly. However, I had concerns about whether she could handle the pressure of such a high-stakes mission without becoming emotionally compromised. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Sarah felt her anger rising as Rodriguez essentially suggested that her gender made her emotionally unstable under pressure. Thompson's expression hardened, and Harrison's eyes narrowed as they both processed what Rodriguez had just said. Commander, Harrison said slowly, his voice carrying a warning tone. Are you suggesting that Captain Mitchell's emotional stability is a concern for mission effectiveness? Rodriguez realized immediately that he had made a serious mistake by voicing what should have remained unspoken. His attempt to provide professional justification for his decision had revealed exactly the kind of thinking that Sarah and Thompson had been concerned about. Sir, what I meant to say is that some missions require pilots who can maintain complete focus under extreme pressure, Rodriguez said, trying to backtrack from his previous statement. I wanted to ensure that we had someone who could execute the mission without any complications. Thompson stood up, his SEAL training and leadership experience evident in his posture and tone. Commander Rodriguez, Captain Mitchell's service record shows 17 successful combat evacuations without a single mission failure or safety incident. Her performance under pressure has been consistently exemplary. What specific evidence do you have to suggest that she would be emotionally compromised or unable to maintain focus? Rodriguez's face grew redder as he realized that Thompson was demanding factual evidence to support what had been essentially a prejudicial assumption. Lieutenant Commander, I don't appreciate being interrogated about my command decisions by someone who wasn't involved in the original planning process. Harrison slammed his hand down on his desk, the sound echoing through the office like a gunshot. Commander Rodriguez, you will answer Lieutenant Commander Thompson's question. If you have specific concerns about Captain Mitchell's ability to execute missions effectively, I need to hear them now, with supporting evidence. Sarah watched as Rodriguez struggled with a situation that had spiraled beyond his ability to control. He had been forced to either provide evidence for claims he couldn't substantiate or admit that his decisions had been based on assumptions rather than facts. Sir, I don't have specific incidents to cite, Rodriguez admitted finally. My concerns were based on general considerations about mission complexity and pilot readiness. Harrison's expression showed clear displeasure as he realized that Rodriguez was unable to provide professional justifications for his assignment decisions. Commander, let me be very clear about something. In this command, pilot assignments are made based on qualifications, experience, and mission requirements. They are not made based on assumptions about emotional stability that cannot be supported by evidence. Sarah felt a surge of vindication as Harrison essentially confirmed that Rodriguez's decision had been inappropriate and based on exactly the kind of bias she had suspected. Captain Mitchell, Harrison continued, turning to face her directly, I am reassigning you to today's evacuation mission, effective immediately. Your qualifications and experience make you the optimal choice for this operation, and I expect you to execute it with the same professionalism and competence you've demonstrated throughout your career. Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized that she had won not just the assignment she wanted, but a much more important victory for professional fairness and merit-based decision-making. Yes, sir. I'm ready and prepared to execute the mission successfully. Harrison turned back to Rodriguez, his expression stern and unforgiving. Commander, you and I will be having a private conversation about assignment procedures and the importance of basing decisions on objective criteria rather than subjective assumptions. I expect this kind of situation to never occur again in my command. Rodriguez nodded stiffly, clearly understanding that his handling of the pilot assignments had been found deficient and that there would be consequences for his actions. Yes, sir. Understood. Thompson stood and extended his hand to Sarah. Captain Mitchell, congratulations on getting the assignment you deserve. I have complete confidence in your ability to execute this mission successfully and safely. As Sarah shook Thompson's hand, she felt overwhelmed by gratitude for his willingness to support her when she couldn't have challenged Rodriguez's decision alone. His backing had been crucial in convincing Harrison to review the assignments and ultimately reverse Rodriguez's decision. Lieutenant Commander Thompson, thank you for bringing this situation to my attention, Harrison said. Your advocacy for operational excellence and fair treatment is exactly the kind of leadership I expect from senior officers in this command. As the meeting concluded and they prepared to leave Harrison's office, Sarah realized that what had started as a personal challenge had become something much larger. The decision to reassign the mission had established important precedents about how pilots would be evaluated and assigned in the future, and it had sent a clear message about the importance of merit-based decision-making. Walking toward the door, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility that came with having fought for and won the assignment she knew she deserved. The evacuation mission would now require her to prove that her advocacy had been justified and that she could indeed execute the operation more effectively than the originally assigned pilot. Rodriguez remained seated as the others prepared to leave, clearly processing the implications of what had just occurred and the impact it would have on his authority and reputation within the squadron. Sarah could see him struggling with the realization that his decision had been not just overruled, but thoroughly discredited in front of subordinates and superiors alike. As they reached the door, Harrison called out one final instruction. Captain Mitchell, I expect a full mission debrief upon your return. I want to document the successful completion of this operation and ensure that all relevant personnel understand the importance of matching pilot qualifications to mission requirements. Sarah nodded, understanding that her performance on this mission would be scrutinized not just for its own sake, but as validation of the entire process that had led to her reassignment. Everything she had worked for, everything she believed about merit and fairness, would be put to the ultimate test in the hours ahead. The C-130 transport aircraft sat on the runway like a mechanical beast ready to devour the sky, its 4 massive turboprops already spinning up to operational speed as Sarah completed her final pre-flight checks. The morning sun had given way to gathering clouds that matched exactly what the weather forecasts had predicted, confirming that the window for safe evacuation was closing rapidly. Sarah's crew consisted of 3 experienced personnel: co-pilot Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes, flight engineer Technical Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, no relation to the commander, and Loadmaster Staff Sergeant David Chun. Each of them had volunteered for the reassigned mission after word spread through the squadron about what had transpired in Captain Harrison's office. As Sarah settled into the pilot's seat and began running through her takeoff checklist, she felt the familiar surge of confidence that came from being exactly where she belonged. Every system check, every instrument reading, every procedural step felt natural and automatic after years of training and experience. This was what she had been prepared for, and this was where her skills could make the difference between mission success and mission failure. Tower, this is Rescue 74 requesting clearance for immediate departure. Sarah spoke into her headset, her voice carrying the calm authority that had been developed through countless hours of flight operations. Rescue 74, you are cleared for takeoff on runway 27. Weather update shows deteriorating conditions at your destination, with visibility dropping to 2 miles and falling. Winds gusting to 35 knots from the southwest. Sarah acknowledged the weather update while making mental adjustments to her flight plan. The conditions were exactly what she had expected based on her pre-mission analysis, and they confirmed that this evacuation would require the kind of precision flying that had become her specialty over years of combat operations. Lieutenant Hayes settled into the co-pilot seat and began coordinating with air traffic control for their departure route. Captain, we've got clearance through the mountain passes, but we'll need to monitor weather conditions continuously for potential route adjustments. Agreed, Sarah replied, advancing the throttles to take off power. Let's also confirm our fuel calculations for extended holding patterns in case we need multiple approach attempts. The aircraft accelerated down the runway with the powerful surge that Sarah had experienced hundreds of times, but today felt different because of everything that had led to this moment. As they lifted off and began climbing toward their cruising altitude, Sarah reflected on how the morning's events had transformed what should have been a routine personnel issue into something that would define her career and potentially influence how future assignments were made. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, the flight engineer, called out altitude and airspeed readings as they climbed through 10,000 feet, his voice professional and confident. Sarah had worked with this crew on multiple previous missions, and their seamless coordination reflected the kind of teamwork that made complex operations successful. Captain, Staff Sergeant Chun called from the cargo area. We've confirmed load configuration for 17 personnel plus medical equipment. Weight and balance are within normal parameters for current weather conditions. Sarah nodded, making mental notes about how the passenger load would affect their performance during the approach and landing at the evacuation site. 17 people were counting on her to get them home safely, and their lives represented the ultimate measure of whether her fight for this assignment had been justified. As they reached cruising altitude and leveled off, Sarah found herself thinking about Commander Rodriguez and the assumptions that had nearly prevented her from flying this mission. She wondered what he was thinking now, knowing that the pilot he had deemed unsuitable for challenging missions was executing exactly the kind of operation he had believed she couldn't handle. The flight to the evacuation site took 2 hours through increasingly challenging weather conditions. Sarah monitored weather reports continuously, adjusting their route to avoid the worst storm cells while maintaining course toward their destination. Her experience with mountain flying and adverse weather operations proved invaluable as they navigated through turbulence and limited visibility. Rescue 74, this is Mountainside Base, came the radio call from their destination. We've got 17 personnel ready for immediate evacuation, but conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Visibility is down to 1 mile and decreasing, with gusts up to 40 knots. Can you execute approach under current conditions? Sarah evaluated the weather information against her training and experience, considering the risks and challenges of landing in such difficult conditions. This was exactly the kind of situation that required split-second decision-making and precise flying skills that couldn't be learned from textbooks or basic flight training. Mountainside Base, Rescue 74 can execute approach under current conditions, Sarah responded. Request wind direction and runway condition updates for approach planning. Lieutenant Hayes looked at Sarah with admiration and slight concern. Captain, These conditions are right at the edge of safe operational limits. Are you confident we can get in and out safely? Sarah checked her instruments and reviewed her approach calculations one final time. Lieutenant, this is exactly the kind of mission I've been training for my entire career. We're going to get those people home safely. The approach to Mountainside Base required navigating through a narrow valley with steep terrain on both sides, limited visibility due to blowing dust and clouds, and crosswinds that demanded constant corrections to maintain proper course alignment. Sarah drew on every hour of mountain flying experience she had accumulated, making smooth adjustments to power and control inputs as they descended toward the runway. Rescue 74, be advised that we're tracking a severe weather front approximately 20 minutes behind your current position, Mountainside Base reported. Recommend expedited ground operations for immediate departure. Sarah acknowledged the weather update while focusing on the complex approach that required her complete attention. The runway appeared through the haze exactly where her navigation calculations had predicted, confirming her preparation and flight planning. She touched down smoothly despite the challenging conditions, demonstrating the kind of precise flying that had made her reputation among naval aviators. Ground operations proceeded with military efficiency as the 17 evacuees boarded the aircraft with their essential equipment and medical supplies. Sarah monitored weather conditions continuously, knowing that their departure window was closing rapidly as the storm front approached their location. Captain Mitchell called one of the evacuees, a senior medical officer who had been trapped at the base for 3 days due to the weather. I want you to know that everyone here is grateful for your willingness to come get us under these conditions. We know this wasn't an easy flight. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her skills and experience had made the difference for people who might have been stranded for days or weeks without this evacuation opportunity. Doctor, getting you home safely is exactly why we're here. That's what military aviation is all about. The departure from Mountainside Base required another challenging takeoff in crosswinds and limited visibility, but Sarah's confidence in her abilities allowed her to execute the maneuver smoothly and safely. As they climbed away from the storm-threatened base, she felt the satisfaction that came from successfully completing exactly the kind of mission she had been trained to handle. The return flight proceeded smoothly despite continuing weather challenges, and Sarah found herself reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. The fight for this assignment had been about more than just one mission or one day's flying. It had been about establishing the principle that military assignments should be based on qualifications and competence rather than assumptions or biases. As they approached Naval Air Station Oceana for landing, Lieutenant Hayes turned to Sarah with obvious admiration. Captain, that was some of the finest flying I've ever witnessed. You made those challenging conditions look routine. Sarah smiled as she lined up for their final approach. Lieutenant, that's what happens when you match pilot qualifications to mission requirements. This is exactly the kind of operation I've been preparing for my entire career. The landing at Oceana was smooth and precise, completing a mission that had tested every aspect of Sarah's training and experience. As they taxied toward the terminal, Sarah could see a small group of people waiting on the ramp, including Captain Harrison, Lieutenant Commander Thompson, and several other squadron personnel who had heard about the day's events. After shutdown and crew debrief, Sarah walked across the ramp toward the waiting group, knowing that her successful completion of the evacuation had proven every point she and Thompson had made about qualifications and mission effectiveness. The 17 evacuees were safely home. The mission had been completed without incident, and the principles of merit-based assignments had been validated in the most meaningful way possible. Captain Harrison approached Sarah with an expression of satisfaction and approval. Captain Mitchell, outstanding work today. Your execution of that evacuation under challenging conditions exemplifies exactly the kind of performance we expect from our most qualified pilots. Thompson stepped forward and shook Sarah's hand. Captain, you've proven today that standing up for what's right and fighting for merit-based assignments serves everyone's interests. Those 17 people are home safely because the most qualified pilot was flying that mission. As Sarah reflected on the day's events, she realized that the morning's challenge to Commander Rodriguez's assignment had evolved into something much larger than a single mission or individual career concern. The successful completion of the evacuation had established important precedents about how pilots would be evaluated and assigned in the future, ensuring that qualifications and experience would be the primary considerations for critical missions. Commander Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the group, his expression showing a mixture of professional respect and personal acknowledgement. He approached Sarah and extended his hand. "Captain Mitchell, congratulations on a successful mission. Your performance today has been noted and will be reflected in my reports." Sarah shook Rodriguez's hand, understanding that his acknowledgement represented something more than professional courtesy. It was recognition that her challenge to his decision had been based on legitimate concerns about mission effectiveness rather than personal ambition or grievance. As the group began to disperse and the normal routine of base operations resumed, Sarah felt a deep sense of accomplishment that went beyond the successful completion of a challenging mission. The events of this day had proven that moral courage, professional competence, and the willingness to stand up for principles could overcome barriers and ensure that the right people were in position to serve their country effectively. Walking back toward the squadron building, Sarah thought about the young female pilots who would follow in her footsteps and the precedent that had been established for merit-based assignments regardless of gender or other irrelevant factors. The fight for this mission had been about more than just one day's flying. It had been about ensuring that military aviation would continue to advance based on competence and qualifications rather than assumptions or limitations. The afternoon sun was setting over Naval Air Station Oceana as Sarah completed her post-flight paperwork and prepared to head home. The routine activities of squadron life continued around her, but she knew that something fundamental had changed in how assignments would be made and how qualified pilots would be evaluated for challenging missions. As she gathered her flight gear and prepared to leave, Sarah received a message that Captain Harrison wanted to see her in his office one final time. When she arrived, she found him reviewing mission reports with obvious satisfaction. "Captain Mitchell," Harrison said, "I wanted to personally thank you for your courage in challenging today's original assignments and for your outstanding execution of the evacuation mission. Your actions have reinforced principles that are essential to effective military operations." Sarah felt a deep sense of pride in knowing that her willingness to fight for what was right had resulted in successful mission completion and important precedents for future operations. "Sir, I'm grateful for your willingness to evaluate assignments based on qualifications and mission requirements. That's what military professionalism is all about." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Captain, I also want you to know that your performance today and your approach to this entire situation will be noted in your fitness reports and considered for future advancement opportunities. The military needs officers who combine technical competence with moral courage." As Sarah left Harrison's office and walked out into the evening air, she reflected on how a morning that had started with frustration and disappointment had evolved into one of the most significant days of her military career. The successful completion of the evacuation had proven that her fight for merit-based assignments had been justified, and the precedents established would benefit countless other pilots who would face similar challenges in their careers. The events of this day had proven beyond any doubt who really ran the flight, not the person with the highest rank or the loudest voice, but the pilot with the skills, experience, and determination to get the job done safely and successfully. Sarah Mitchell had demonstrated that competence and courage were the true measures of leadership, and that sometimes the most important victories were won not in the air, but on the ground where principles were defended and excellence was demanded.